This video will cover the logical functions practice that we covered in lab this past Friday. I did modify my screen so that it will not show my whole screen, and just so that it hopefully is more clear as you're looking over these videos and that you can actually see the Excel files and the words. So if we go to our logical functions Word document, you'll notice on page 1 that there is a file called logical functions practice. So that is the file that I'm working in. So if you want to go ahead and open that up, what you'll notice is there's a worksheet, and there's multiple worksheets within it. One that's labeled true false, and that's ultimately where I'm starting. So what our true false function does is really is just looking to see if the content of one cell is equal to the content of another. It's very simple. It allows you to do a very quick matching, and once again it would identify any differences in the content of one cell to the next. So if we go into cell D1, what we're simply going to do is we're going to type in equal. We're going to type in A1, and we're going to say, is that equal to the content in B1, or is equal to A1 equal to B1? And what that'll do is it'll just give a very quick logical argument and look at the content and identify if they are exactly the same or if they are different. So if we go ahead and copy those down, you'll notice that in the second row, A2 is equal to B2, so therefore it'll return a value of true. If we want to go ahead and over off to the side, we want to put in some type of text values. So I'm going to type in G1, I'm going to type in the word hello. In H1, I'm going to type in hello, and I'm going to put a space after that. In I1, I'm going to look to see if those are equal to each other. So is G1 equal to H1? You'll notice that it's retrieving a value of false because of the fact if I go into H1, I put a space after the word hello. So your true false is only going to identify if there's an exact match, so any type of spacing would cause some type of error to result. But very helpful when you're trying to match up data and you don't want to go through and look through a vast amount. You want to use a function to return a value. Very easy way to do so. If we move over to our if function, if very simple, you're just comparing the results of two cells and ultimately giving it instruction in terms of what it should result. So if we go ahead and press on our little function box, our fx, go ahead and type in the word if, you'll notice that it'll show up, and there's other stuff that also is conditional that shows up as well. So our logical test for this one is that we want to look to see if the student grade or the value in C2 is either greater than or equal to the value in B2. So for this test, we say C2 greater than or equal to B2. You'll notice that in the function box it's already retrieving a value of true. So that means that the student has passed. So that will be the value that we write if the answer is true. So we're going to go ahead and write passed. If it is not, we're going to use the word failed. Okay, so we're just going to identify exactly what, if the student has passed or failed, by just simply using some type of formula. So in this one, a grade of 71 is equal to or greater than 70, so therefore it would retrieve a value of passed. Go ahead and copy this down. You'll notice that in the next one, the student had a grade of 68, and the passing grade is 70, so therefore it's retrieved a value of failed. If we move on to our OR function, now OR is not to be used alone, it's to be used embedded into an if function. So basically if there's some sort of, there's multiple criteria where the student, or the situation applies where it's A or B, and that ultimately would allow somebody to achieve some type of result, then we want to use your OR, but we want to nest it inside of your if statement. What I find is helpful for this is to actually first go to the OR statement. So if I first go ahead to my function box and I call up my OR statement, I first want to go ahead and put in my logical test. And I do this because if I start with my if, I cannot, it's difficult to get that function box to pop up and to populate. And I want to think through what are the criteria by which somebody would pass my test, or in this instance, I have two different types of scores that I'm looking against. I want to create both of my arguments separately, and then I want to put them inside or nest them inside my if statement. So for the first one, I want to come up with my first logical test. So therefore, I want to look to see if my student ACT score, or the value in C2, is greater than or equal to the value in B2. So this is my first argument, okay, and right now you'll see that it's true. My second logical argument is going to be, is the student score, or the value in E2, is that greater than or equal to the value in my D2? And you'll see for this first student, both of their test scores are considered to be passing, okay? So in this instance, that's okay. First, what we want to do then is you want to go back up to the toolbar, the function bar, and you want to start typing in the word if. And now what you'll do is you can go ahead and if you are in the actual if, so you're in between the if, and then you press the function box, you'll notice that now it pops up the function argument box. So the whole logical test that we just created, the OR statement, is now as your logical test in your if statement. And now what we want to do is identify if they meet one of the two criteria, what do we want it to retrieve? And we're putting in the word accepted. If it's false to either or, so one of the two arguments that we have created, we would put, you know, not accepted or some other type of term to say no thank you. So now what you'll see here is that as long as the student is passing one of the two, it should accept them. So let's go ahead and copy down. Now we can see for the second example, this student had an ACT score of 12. The minimum criteria is 21, so therefore they did not pass with ACT. However, they did pass with the SAT, so therefore they should be accepted. If you want to move down to one that's listed as not, you'll see that they did not meet either of the minimum criteria, so therefore it returned the correct result. So you always want to go back and double check at least a couple of your situations and make sure that it's populating the correct result, because it's very easy to mess up your formula. So you want to just double check to make sure you're on the right track. Okay, so that's how we would nest our OR. Same thing with the AND. I find it helpful to go ahead and to input the AND statement first, just because it will walk me through the various arguments. So here, if we have both of our student scores, they have to meet the minimums for both. So our first one would be that the student score is going to be greater than or equal to the minimum. And our second one, same function or same logic, is greater than or equal to our minimum. So we have two criteria. Now what we'll do is we'll go back into the formula bar. We will type in the word if. If you go between the I and the F and press the little function box, it will pop up and it will populate the whole test for you that we just created using our AND into the logical test. Now if it's true, if they meet both criteria, we'll go ahead and write accepted. We'll go ahead and write not accepted if it's false. So this is a different set of criteria in that you have to meet the minimums of both. So you'll notice there's a lot more not accepted because, for example, in the second student that we looked at already, their ACT score fell below the minimum. So therefore, they did not meet both of the criteria, and so now they are not accepted. Your if error allows you to go ahead and to see exactly if there's some sort of error in your formula. So for example, anytime we're doing a divide by zero, we're going to get an error message. Or sometimes, like if we're using a VLOOKUP and we're using it for an exact match or a primary key, sometimes if it doesn't find an exact match, it will return an error message as well. Let's say we don't want it to return an error message, we just want it to show as blank if there is no value for the formula that we're using. So let's go ahead and open up your function box and type in if error. So this formula will basically, we go ahead and in our value, this is where we go ahead and write in any type of formula. So if you're using a VLOOKUP, this is where your VLOOKUP would be. For our practice, we're just doing a very simple value. So we're just taking the content of A2 and we're dividing it by the content of B2. If there's an error, we just want it to return some type of value that is, blank. So what we can do is in your if error, you can just simply go ahead and type in a space. What you will notice is that by default, it put quotations, and inside those quotations is a space. So you could also just do quotations with nothing in there, and it would retrieve a blank value. I put it so that there's a space being entered in the event that the formula is unable to retrieve a value. So you'll notice for the second one here, it's actually the content of it is actually going to be a space. Okay, and that really is just so that your data looks cleaner and you don't see a lot of these various error messages. So this is helpful too if you embed it inside of formulas. So you might use some type of if function, but also do an if error so that it retrieves or puts in some type of message. You could also too, and if we go back to this, we could also, instead of if error, we can actually put in some type of text. so that as we're copying this value down, it's not necessarily a blank space, but there's some sort of notification for you that there is an error in that particular field. So that's also helpful. We have our COUNTIF function is next, and our COUNTIF function really is just to give an idea in terms of how you're counting something based off of one criteria. So if I use COUNTIF, there's one criteria. If I use COUNTIF-S, that's up to 255 different sets of criteria I can put on a particular data set. So if we start out with our just COUNTIF, if we go to this, you'll notice that we are first going to identify the range. So this is the range of cells that we want to count given our criteria that we are going to set. So our range is going to be equal to the content from B2 all the way down to B14. Our criteria for this first example is going to be Y. So what we're saying is count the values or count the number of cells that contain the criteria equal to Y. And go ahead and hit, and you'll hit enter, you'll get a value of 6. And if we go back, we can very easily manually count that. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So it did effectively count the cells with that amount, with a Y value. We can also too, if we wanted to go back in here from B2 to B14, make that an absolute reference because that's not going to change. We can go ahead and copy that down. And then instead of making it from a Y, we can then just go into our formula and edit it very quickly and go ahead and change that to an N. And you'll notice that it'll also give us the values of N's, which are going to be 7. Okay, so, and we have a total of 13 records here, so that makes sense. It's evenly splitting them up between the Y's and the No's. And this is one set of criteria. If we were to layer on an additional set of criteria, we could also add something else. So maybe it's not just name and paid, but it's also maybe paid amount. Or we can add on some additional criteria that it's some sort of date where you can put some sort of beginning and ending value. So it gives you a lot of different options in terms of different things you would count if given multiple criteria. Moving on to our SUMIF and SUMIF-S. So SUMIF is going to be summing something based off of one set of criteria that we're placing on it. So we go ahead and open up our function box, we type in SUMIF, and we go ahead and populate that. You'll notice it's giving us range of cells we want evaluated for the condition. So this will be our region because we are going to only sum those that are listed as our East region. Our criteria is going to be equal to, and what you can do for criteria is you can manually type it in, or you can actually make it a reference to one of the values included within your data set, and that'll allow you to minimize the potential for some type of error in typing in your value. For our sum range, this is where we would go ahead and highlight the cells that contain the values we want to add it together. And for this instance, it would be D2 to D14. Notice that our range and our sum range, they need to be lined up. So I started selecting from C2 to C14, so my sum range starts with D2 to D14. You want to make sure that those are in the same rows so that it knows exactly how to add up. If they are different, it could cause an error in your sum. So if we go ahead and we are putting in our value here, and now we're getting an error message. Okay, just pause it for a second so I can figure out what was going on with the formula. What ends up happening is if you're using any type of criteria and you are referring to another cell, you also, Excel views any type of formula that you are written. It views it as two different pieces. For example, we need to first separate out the equal sign, and then we have to connect it using your ampersand sign and also the content of another piece or another cell. So for example, we have to say, okay, the criteria is going to be equal to, so that's an instruction for Excel, that's an instruction alone. We have to connect it to the content in the cell H4. So by doing that, we need to connect it using our AND symbol, okay? And that allows us to go ahead and to recognize the content of H4. And you'll notice over here, it'll say equal to East. If we were to do, we could do our SUMIF-S, and once again, that's putting in multiple criteria, so not only looking at the condition 1 being the region, but also looking at the dates associated with it. Same thing for your SUMIF-S. is that we are going to need to make sure that we also connect our criteria using our and symbol. So the sum range, and this is asking the same things, it's just in different order. We start with the sum value, so that'll be the content from D2 to D14. Criteria range, so our first criteria is going to be our region, so we'll go ahead and select C2 to C14, and our first criteria is going to be equal to, so we want to do quotes equal, we want to do the and symbol, and we want to connect it using the content of each 9. You'll notice off to the side it says equal to east, which is exactly what we wanted to verify against. Our criteria range 2 is going to be our date. So we're going to go ahead and select the values from B2 to B14. Our criteria is going to look at the date in our cell of I9, and we want it to be greater than or equal to. So we'll use our quotes. We will use greater than or equal to close our quotes. We will go ahead and connect it using the and symbol and pull up the value in I9. We will move on to criteria number 3. We will then again select our date range from B2 to B14. Criteria 3 will be less than or equal to. So we will go ahead and use our quotes. We will do less than or equal to, close our quotes. We will connect it to the content of J9 using our and symbol. We will go ahead and click OK. If we wanted to verify if this was working correctly, we could very easily go ahead and select row 1 for columns A through D, go to your data ribbon, put on a filter, and we could very easily just go ahead and select East and go ahead and further refine that down to our month of September and look over, and the total amount is 658, which is what we were able to obtain using our formula over here. Okay, so SUMIF-S allows you to go up to 255 criteria. Same thing for COUNT-IF-S. Multiple criteria can be placed on the values.